The article further goes into competition and snowboarding, and really the roots of snowboarding, as they explain, there wasn't a need to have competition in it. That's not what the youth wanted to do. Skiing was so organized and so made into almost a systematic sport that competition was a very large part of it. And snowboarding wasn't that. It was about free riding. It was about being creative. It was about being unique and just getting in touch with nature and the sport itself. So it was a very selfish sport in that way. It wasn't about competing and being on top. But the interesting thing about the article is says that it started competing because athletes recognized that by competing and such, it would grow popularity, and there would be more promotion for the sport. And through competition, it actually enabled snowboarders to continue doing what they love, which is snowboarding, and get paid for it. They would make money by doing these competitions. And the article explains that even the snowboarders today, the professional athletes, still explain the reason why they snowboard as being for themselves and for the love of the sport. And they often explain this awkward balance between how they have to compete and they have to make money competing, but that's not really the reason why they do it. That was just an enabler so they could actually do it. So there was this give and take between it, where you could argue with skiing that a lot of the competition was to compete, and it's not necessarily for the enjoyment of the sport. In that regards, I would say there's give and take there, but I definitely understand how snowboarding might be more like the professionals say, just for the love of the sport, where skiing, it is definitely for competing and has been set up that way traditionally, and certainly that way with sports in general. The most interesting point that I think the article had to make was that there is a lot of different kinds of snowboarding out there. There's freestyle, there's free riding, there's racing. So there's lots of different genres out there. But even now today, with the shift into almost mainstream culture, is that the sport has been marketed and commercialized, and it's been commercialized so that companies only really show snowboarding as a rebellious youth kind of culture. And by doing that, they make this kind of niche market that a lot of people want to join in because it's considered cool under, I guess, society. But the fact is that there's a lot of normal people out there, and the majority of the people out there snowboarding are not these youth rebellious types. In the article, it says that many of these people are just healthy, mid to high income snowboarders and or people, and they're nothing like the original roots of where snowboarding came from. But the media and these corporations market it very different to give it that cool kind of factor, which I thought was very, very neat. At the end of the article, the main discussion in this piece is actually about snowboarding being in the Olympics. And there's a lot of pros and cons and a lot of debate about having snowboarding in the Olympics. First of all, you go back to the roots of it. It's not about competing. It was about, free spirit and experiencing and just enjoying yourself doing this in this creative sport. And it's become now into an organization, or now into the Olympics, which has a very set level of standards and levels, and has to be kind of, I guess, evaluated in a sense. And that's not what snowboarding has really been about. And when it was brought into the 1998 Winter Olympics, there was a huge amount of debate, issues, all sorts of things kind of exploded. First of all, the governing body for snowboarding when it entered the Olympics for the first time was actually a ski group. It wasn't even a snowboarding group. Many snowboarders were outraged by this and thought that the International Snowboarding Federation should have control over snowboarding in the Olympics, and they didn't. And a lot of people said that, the skiing organization took it over for market, network places and money reason economics to make money. And so there was all that kind of debate between it. And then also there was a pro snowboarder, Terdra from, I believe, Norway. And he was arguably the best snowboarder in the world at that time, especially halfpipe. And he refused to go into the Olympics at that time. He didn't even want to qualify. He didn't go into it at all. And that caused a big uproar because the level of competition then in the Olympics was not on par in comparison to some of these other network TV competitions. It was actually a much lower set of standards for the sport. So it's interesting that, you know, you think the Olympics, you'd see the best of the best of the best always there. But, you know, for the first year of snowboarding, it wasn't true because it was kind of like the snowboarders were boycotting it just because they believed that in the way that it was being operated or taken over, especially by the ski company or ski organization managing it, that it wasn't really had the best interests of the sport and representing the snowboarding culture together. And finally, for the Olympic debate, in the 1998 Olympic debate, there was, of course, a guy named Ross who happened to find, they found marijuana in his system, and he was stripped of his medal, eventually given it back because they found out, you know, that this committee that stripped him of his medal didn't have the power to take away his prize. And then another governing body said, well, marijuana was not on the, you know, list of drugs that actually help anybody perform by any means. So with this, there was a lot of debate and issue about this taking place. And I thought it was very interesting because when you think about it, snowboarding became, or kind of derived out of rebellious youth culture. And I like to see it, you know, here, you know, a couple decades later in 1998, that this almost rebellious and uproar and very instability is still happening, and it happened at the Olympics on the world stage. Watching the film First Descent, there was an interview, I forget with who, but it was a pro snowboarder, and they talked about this event, and he said he wouldn't want it any other way. You know, this is what snowboarding was about. And I thought it was an interesting way that almost snowboarding culture and the roots of the culture was preserved in this whole big scandal and happening between it coming into the Olympics. So I thought that was very neat. But since then, they don't really talk about, this article is a little bit old, so they don't talk about the Olympics since then. And since then, you've seen a huge growth of snowboarding in the Olympics. And I would almost argue, just from watching the Winter Olympics here just this year in Vancouver, that snowboarding was probably one of the most popular sports watched. I could be very biased because I live in a resort town where the snowboarding is very large and most of my friends are snowboarders and, you know, younger culture, but even my parents were talking about it. My father was talking about this huge spin that Shaun White had pulling off. Shaun White has become a household name now. I would argue that, you know, out of the households in Canada, that almost every household that watched the Olympics would be able to tell you that Shaun White won gold in the Olympics and for the men's halfpipe. So to have that kind of influence, just, you know, not even that long, you know, just 10 years, a little bit more than 10 years after the first Winter Olympics that snowboarding was allowed into, is huge kind of influence into mainstream media. And it makes you wonder to think, like, what will happen from here? Will the rebellious youth, will the subculture of snowboarding just being able to be a relaxing kind of sport and not really competing really exist? Or is it going to start to take on new traditions and a set of rules and traditions like skiing did and become very competitive and have kids growing up and just not even really just riding for the fun of it, but always just competing from day one? So I don't know what it's going to happen with it. Part of me wants to say that that might happen, but I think a large part of me thinks that it will always stay just kind of the individual, creative, and free-loving sport that it is. And I hope it does, because I think that's why I do it. I've never had any wish to compete in the sport, and I just do it because it's a ton of fun.